Well, welcome, Doug, to the Walk Around podcast. It's great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. Appreciate it.
You know, I think we want to jump right in all the activity that JD Power's been doing in the automotive space. I mean, you look at the acquisitions of ALG, of Darwin. Certainly, our partnership is going to be very exciting in the F&I space. It seems like JD Power is moving from that trusted observer of the automotive business to really driving the automotive business. Talk to us about the strategy and where you guys are headed.
Well, we are best known certainly by the public for the benchmarking business that we have, and that was established back in 1968. And for a long time, that was what JD Power did, was we benchmarked the industry,
right?
Both on the product side and on the service side. I think when Dave Power retired, the CEO of GM said that Dave Power is the most feared man in Detroit because of the history of benchmarking the industry. But along the way, we began to do some other things, collect data. We have something called the Power Information Network, and that has grown and grown. And that's really a much bigger part of our company now, is the data and analytics business. All of it is aimed at supporting the industry, though, helping the industry, the auto industry. And we also, I probably won't talk too much about, we have a significant amount of activity in some other industries, but supporting the industry to be more efficient at what they do,
Yeah, no, it's a great mission at JD Power. It's kind of funny, I think, going back to that 1968. I mean, really, you guys were a data company back then. It just wasn't digital data, right? I mean, you guys were recording surveys. Is that how it all happened? Was it all a survey-based kind of system back then?
Yeah, it started out as voice of the customer, information, right? And it wasn't an insignificant amount of information, and it isn't, right? Behind the ranking of, this car is the best one and second best, et cetera. Behind that, there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of individual data points. And,
right.
I worked in the industry. I was a customer, or, I used to say a victim of JD Power before I joined the company. And that information, that, again, some people call it research, but the fact that it's consistent year over year, and it has a very detailed structure to it, that, I say that's data. It's data that comes out of the mouths of customers, and it becomes the structure that those companies use to organize their efforts to improve. They literally assign, the IQS study has 270 questions on it. At every car company I've worked at, there are people who are assigned individual questions that they're supposed to work on, right, to make the answers better.
So, Doug, talk about, if you're a dealer, and you mentioned part of your mission is to support the industry to make it more efficient. How are some ways dealers can utilize JD Power more, or maybe some opportunities that you see they're not doing that they should have as top of mind?
Well, in the dealer side, the benchmarking we do is the SSI study, so sales satisfaction, and CSI, the customer service, for customers that you have. What I see a lot of, just to be open, is some dealers are taking the approach that that they just want to make the score get better, because usually the automaker is pushing them to, do better, because the automaker wants to have a good score. They want to make sure the experience their customers are having is good. And doing better in something like SSI or CSI, it shouldn't be pursued as just trying to get somebody off my back. It should be pursued as, if I do better, it's going to make my customers happy. It's going to be more loyal. They're going to recommend my dealership to others. And many times the pursuit of the score can actually damage that. You end up motivating your employees to try to just get a score, and actually the customer can feel that, and sometimes we've seen it where it makes things worse. So I and my team are constantly working on what changes can we make to help to eliminate sort of that behavior.
Yeah, it's an interesting industry, kind of catch-22, if you will, because you want to measure the customer experience, right? You want to measure it in a meaningful way, but you also don't want to
chase a number.
Yeah, chase a number. And at the end of the day, it's not about creating a good survey score. It's about creating a good experience. And often in my experience, dealership associates are coached to get a good score, not necessarily coached to give a good experience. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. But I want to go back to something you said there a second ago, that at points in your career you feared JD Power, and what a career you've had. And I want to make sure our audience knows, you've had a hell of a resume here: Chrysler, Nissan, Toyota, but one name jumps off the page. Mark and I were talking before this. One name to us jumps off the page, Apple. So you went, probably about good 15, 20 years in the auto business, and then jumped ship and went over to Apple. Tell us about that change. Why did you jump like that to Apple? And
what were some of the innovations or product launches that you were involved in?
Yeah. So I went to Apple. I got contacted by Apple. It wasn't like I was bothering them, but I got contacted by Apple, which I was kind of surprised about it. But, when I was contacted by them, it was before there was all the talk about an Apple car.
Right.
So again, I was a bit bewildered. And, what they said was that we found that people in the auto industry are pretty effective at getting things done, and particularly related to quality. A car is a very complicated thing. And so they said, we think we can benefit from your leadership and your experience. And I went over there, and then, right after that, then there was all this talk about a car. And, I think that they were also kind of stocking the shelves in the event that they decided to make a car, to have some people who know a thing or two about that. But while I was there, certainly I can't. Apple's a very secretive company, and certainly I can't talk about everything I did. But one thing I did work on was Macs and MacBooks, the computer side. So, I learned a lot about a totally different product, and certainly a product cycle that's different. The thing that at some point I realized is that Apple is a company that, if you go a level up, Apple is a company that makes Christmas presents. Right? And the product life cycle is about getting the warehouse full of Christmas presents by the fall, so that when people want to buy a new computer or a phone or whatever, that there's a new one available, and it's the hot thing to put under the tree. So very, very different cadence. But the product is different as well. And it was interesting to understand the differences in company culture that were really dictated by the difference in the product that was being made.
Mm-hmm. I'm really interested in knowing more, because you brought up product life cycle. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting as it relates to the car business, because recently Apple decided to kill the iPod.
Yeah. Right? Just an iconic, the iPod, the end of an era. Yeah. I think we probably all saw the news there that Apple has killed off the iPod.
Right. So when you think about the car business, Doug, I know you have been vocal in terms of there's just way too many variations when it comes to vehicle options. When you think about all the combinations.
Right. Thousands
of them. So what's your thought in terms of the OEMs and looking, especially now with inventory levels the way they are? Do you see what companies embracing that?
What could the OEMs learn a bit from Apple in terms of killing off a product at the right time?
Yeah. This configuration complexity, which is what you're talking about in the auto industry, it has been way out of control. And, I kind of see how we got there. And it's been something that I've been, sort of campaigning against from inside car companies for a long time. The trouble has been there hasn't been data to understand, like if there's one mid-size SUV that a company offers that had, at least the last time I looked, they had 1,200 different configurations of that vehicle.
Right.
And that's excluding color. So forget about color. There's 1,200 different versions of that car that they have built and shipped to the market. And, and I mean, there are some versions of that vehicle where only 3 were ever made. Now, the person who bought those 3, they don't know that they've got this really rare vehicle that it doesn't have a sunroof, but it's got this and that, and
pink leather seats,
and they didn't buy it because it was just like the light shined down. Oh, that's what I've been looking for. They bought it because it was on the lot and a dealer ordered it, and the OEM allowed that unique configuration to be ordered, and it eventually sold. And this is one of the data sets that we've put together, and almost circling back to your earlier comment about how could dealers better make use of what we have. We have this product that for each configuration, it can say, here's how on average the days to turn for that configuration in this market or in that market, days to turn and dealer profitability. And if you say, well, days to turn and dealer profitability, ones that sell profitably and quick, that must be what the market wants.
Right.
And ones that sit for a long time and I end up having to sell it at a loss, those are the ones that I really should have never ordered. And we have that data across the whole industry. So we could help a dealer to identify which vehicles to order for my city, or if it's a dealer group, if I'm going to order vehicles for Atlanta or for Houston, should I get something different? And what are the hot, 5 configurations? So I just don't have all this stuff in stock that isn't really what the market wants.
Right. Well, and really thinking about another, industry topic to connect the dot here, but inventory levels are at their lowest pretty much of all time.
Yeah.
And I think about, the manufacturers saying, I think Toyota came out and said, well, it's not going to be a 45-day supply. I think we're targeting more of a 30, right? And you've heard similar kind of comments in that new normal from other manufacturers. But I think what you're saying, if I'm hearing correctly, is configuration is a direct conflict to that notion of lower day supply in a sense, because how could you possibly have enough if you're going to have thousands, and literally the math you just did, right? That's tens of thousands of configurations on a single vehicle. How do you possibly have the right mix on a lot at a 30 days? Right.
Yeah, you can't unless you drastically reduce what you're offering. And so the problem has always been, or the perceived problem has always been, that you look at your competitor and say, oh, they have this configuration. And what if that's what people want and I don't have one? But the chances of you actually having one on the lot,
right,
you've got, this many different ones is 0 anyway.
Exactly.
So there's a tremendous, and my experience is more, I started in manufacturing and then later got into product development and other things. But this configuration complexity drives a huge amount of cost for the factories and for the engineering development, because you really need to build and test each configuration, make sure there's not some interactions. The factory has to stock the parts and the ability to build whatever pops up. So there's a lot of cost being carried by this what I think the data says is an excess amount of configuration complexity.
Yeah, and just to follow that up, I connect it back to the first thing we talked about, customer experience. Mm-hmm. And the salesperson on the lot trying to get a good SSI score or CSI score. That salesperson has to understand all of these configurations. They're supposed to be product experts, right? And helping the customer to make the right decision on the car they want. And, trying to connect those dots, do you think that product complexity impacts ultimately the ability for the dealer and the salesperson on the showroom floor
Yeah.
to deliver a great
Uh,
sales experience.
Yeah, I think
Really,
it
it's more
does.
of
I
a
mean,
threat.
if you,
It's less of a threat and more of an
yeah,
opportunity for the dealer.
yeah, I've always thought that, if you online, you sort of open it up to all the ways that, the vehicle. I mean, I live in Tennessee, and, I drive a truck. And so I'm frequently daydreaming about the next truck I'm going to get. And I get on a website, and, you can build what you want, and I'm clicking around. And even that is pretty, I mean, I know the business, but that's pretty confusing, because a lot of times you click something and then it's like, well, you have to take this other thing off that you put on earlier. And I'm like,
Right.
what? You're constantly backing up and going back forward. And
That's
you
right.
finally get this thing that you've decided among all these choices that you want. And then you check to see if it's around. Of course, let's set aside right now, because nothing's around right now, right? So,
Sure.
but you check to see if it's around, and of course it isn't. I mean, here's the closest match, and it's like, well, that's not even the color I want. So you start out disappointed because you've been told, hey, configure what you want, and then, yeah, but we don't have that, and if you order it, it's going to be 4 months before you get it.
Yeah.
It's come out of the gate already having to compromise. Where if you only offered a few things, you wouldn't get your heart set on anything. You'd pick one of the few, and hopefully, if it was just a few, the dealer would have it or could get it pretty quick for you.
Yeah, to be able to make the experience less overwhelming.
Sure.
It seems to be more logical.
Well, and the funny thing is, you hear tons of talk about digital retailing and the dealerships and everyone focusing on the technology. And, I think what we're trying to say here is the manufacturer has an impact on the customer experience, both online and in store, from the manufacturing perspective. Just from a build and configuration perspective, clearly has an impact on the experience that the customer is going to feel. So an interesting take. Again, we're talking to Doug Betts, president of the automotive division at JD Power. And Doug, we, you mentioned your engineering by trade, and we're going to get into this in a second here. We know you're a Georgia Tech guy. We're going to get back to that. But thinking about just switching gears a second, EVs has been a tremendous topic in the industry, and I read a stat: you get 100 EV vehicles, new models, new entrants, coming out in the next year. I believe in the next model year. Tell us about adoption of EVs. Do you see this as a slow burn in terms of adoption, or do you see this as a tipping point that's just about to arrive?
Well, we've definitely seen an acceleration in the last year of adoption, and we're working on what is a very ambitious project about pulling together a lot of data related to EVs. We're calling it the EV index right now, but that name sounds a lot simpler than what we're doing. And we're looking at, because, if you talk about adoption,
sure,
there's a lot of factors that stand in the way of adoption right now. Certainly one of them is the consumer's willingness to accept the differences in an EV, the range of it, the charge time, and that kind of stuff. But starting with availability. I mean, a lot of segments of the industry have not been covered. So until recently, I mean, actually, I don't think they're out yet, but I could not
pick up truck
EV because I drive a truck, and there wasn't one, right? I mean, there's getting ready to be one. Now then I move on to the next question is I have a camper, well, is my range going to be a real problem pulling the camper? Maybe I still can't adopt because of the use case that I have. But so we're looking at all of that and calculating adoption, but adoption as a percentage of the segments where there are vehicles. And so the adoption, nationally is maybe 5%, in terms of just counting up vehicles. But if you look at it as well, but only these segments are available, maybe the adoption is more like 15%, right? Because you can't expect somebody who wants a truck to adopt an EV that's a car. So it's really interesting, and it's different state by state. and it's different zip code by zip code. And there are issues with infrastructure. If you are a person who can charge at home, you've got your infrastructure, problem solved, because you're not going to be running around to the grocery store and stopping for a charge. You leave the house with a 300-mile tank of gas, and you don't stop at the gas station on that day, and you're going to leave the house every day that way. So there's a lot for us to learn and get used to about the differences. And once we have this data set together, we're going to have some very, very cool insights about where people are more willing to adopt an EV and why, versus where maybe the infrastructure has a lot of work that needs to be done before people will be willing to adopt.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I'd be curious to see that research, because I think you're right. When you look at it that way, probably the adoption is greater than people realize. That would be my hypothesis in your research. But I also think about, you guys are well known for the J.D. Power initial quality study. How do you go about looking at quality on an EV? And I'll put that question in context that, we've been doing research on EVs here at JM&A. And what's interesting about EV is the battery, in the sense that batteries degrade, and batteries degrade depending on different things, like the battery itself, the conditions in which the battery is being driven, the conditions in which the battery is being charged. And so, the question becomes, on a mass scale, as you guys think about those rankings, those quality rankings, how do you gauge the battery on an EV? How do you gauge the quality of the battery, given all those different factors that go into how a battery degrades? Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and we're working on a solution for that. As you may know, J.D. Power bought a company called ALG last fall. Yep. ALG sets residual values essentially for the industry, and that's what turns into lease rates. And this, everybody's kind of used to internal combustion and how to think about whether I've got a car that's in good condition or not. The actual used car transaction prices are, in the end, going to define residual value. But ALG is tasked with predicting that. And so the battery now being 30% of the cost of the car, and a huge expense if you were to buy a used EV and then find out 2 months later that you got a dud on the battery. Sure. Oh, it's a big problem, right? And a fear of buyers. And so when buyers are uncertain and fearful, they're going to pay less. So we're working on, we believe that following a car using connected data, that you can understand the battery state of health. You don't even have to follow it its whole life, but maybe look at it towards the end. We're really trying to work on how can we certify a battery. And so that a used car buyer can say, okay, here's a car. I like the way it looks, doesn't have any dents or anything in it, and doesn't smell like anybody smoked in it. But, and here's a certificate that says the battery is healthy and it has 95% of its capacity remaining. And now I can feel comfortable buying this car. So we're kind of working on that with some, people that are more scientific about batteries. How can we provide that assurance to buyers?
It's really interesting just to hear about all the different facets of the business that you guys are exploring. And no doubt, if you're a dealer, Doug, you mentioned the data that you guys have on the configuration preferences. Yeah. If you're a dealer, where do you suggest a dealer goes to utilize that if they're not already doing it? Where can they find that information?
Yeah, when we created this, the first customer we had in mind was the automaker themselves, because, I alluded to all the cost of manufacturing to maintain complexity. So we've been actively promoting that with automakers. We have had conversations with large dealer groups. We don't really have I don't have a sales force that's going and knocking on dealers' doors and saying, look at what I've got. So, I think if we had dealers that were interested in it, they can contact us through whatever, network they have. We have a website, and you can say, I'm interested in this configuration thing. And we can, we'll start to work where the demand is. Certainly, though, for a dealer, we have the information to say, hey, for this market in this segment, you tell us you want 10 configurations or you want 5, and we can tell you the hottest 10 configurations for your market, so that you're stocking your
That's
your lot.
really valuable information for
well,
sure.
and I know, I used to utilize the PIN, the Power Dealer report.
Sure.
It's a great report for any dealers out there that are not getting that report. They should. I believe that's a free report, Doug, you guys provide. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, Doug, you've given us a lot of insights, but now it's time to turn to a segment we like to call a sure thing. And this is where you can put your knowledge somewhat to the test and validate or challenge our own Elliott Shore's opinions on the automotive industry. And we all know he has a lot of opinions.
Yeah.
So we like to hear it. We like to challenge it. So Elliott, let's take a sure thing.
Yeah, let's do it. So, as you mentioned, JD Power is a data company. So I am going to go a little tough on you this time. And now I will tell you, I've been on Mark's been keeping track this season, and I haven't exactly had a good batting average.
Let's just say he's towing the Mendoza line.
Yes, towing it. But we're excited to bring to you a sure thing. And so, we were talking about inventory and inventory levels. And I believe inventory levels will never go back to where they were in 2019, ever. Sure thing or not a sure thing?
Not a sure thing.
Tell us more. Oh, for one. Thank you, Mark. Yes, you didn't say it, but
I didn't have to.
Okay.
We all know.
Well, and a lot of people ask me about that because, some of the automakers are saying, yeah, we're never going to go back to that.
Right.
I think they said that before, by the way. I was in the industry in 2009, and I believe I remember people saying that back then too. And I've been in the meetings where the decisions are made at a couple of automakers for sure, at the highest level. And the problem is incremental profit on a car. If you run a factory on a Saturday,
Right.
forget about the overtime. Doesn't matter. If you're going to make 700 more cars on tooling that you've already paid for, all these fixed costs that you're covering.
Sure.
Can you not run on a Saturday? Can you tell yourself, we just need to maintain that discipline when across town, they're also having a meeting and they're talking about whether they're going to run on Saturday, and everybody's going to run on Saturday. There's too much, and you're going to say, well, it won't hurt. And those guys, they're going to do it. So if they're going to do it, then why wouldn't we do it? We'll let them have those sales and we're not going to get them.
Correct.
And boom, 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 boom. Next thing you know.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion.
No, it's an interesting take. And, I think it's a pretty valid argument.
Pretty valid. You can't really.
Well, the reality is, right, the currency of automakers for many years is market share.
Sure.
That's what they focus on. And at the end of the day, having less inventory is kind of an admission that we're not going to focus on market share. And I think that's a tough drug to kind of, you're mentioning the economics of it. But the market share goals, you've seen many automakers pursue market share to their own detriment at times.
Yeah.
The
reality of today's situation, everybody's enjoying very high profitability on a per unit basis, and it's largely compensating for the lack of volume, and that's great. But the only reason it works is because right now everybody is participating, and it will only work if everybody participates. And why is everybody participating today? Because everybody can't get the parts.
Right.
So once the parts are available, then, some people may say, of course they can't. They can't meet it. They can't have a meeting and say, hey guys, let's don't,
Correct.
can't do that. And, some will break ranks. And as soon as some break ranks, then so will others, and it'll all be over.
And the other factor is, are consumers really willing to wait? I think they're in a situation now where they have to, but the jury's still out on that.
And I've heard a dealer talk about this in the sense that I've asked dealers, will you take the inventory if the manufacturers build it? I know you say you love this model, but will you take it? And one perspective I heard was, I will take every single vehicle I can all day, every day, because to the dealer, it's an advantage. right? It's an advantage to have more vehicles. And so,
no, each dealer is going to make that same decision. They're going to look across the street and say, he doesn't have anything on his lot. If you got some, give them to me. Because
Exactly.
people will go over there and they'll look across the street and they'll think, I could drive home tonight with one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
All right.
great dynamic. Okay.
Second at bat.
All right. So we talked a little bit about EV, and we know there's no shortage of news about EV automakers, and whether they're traditional automakers, whether they're direct to consumer, new entrants. There's no shortage of information available and news out there, whether on Wall Street or Main Street or, in Detroit. And so, but I believe that in the next 12 months, one EV automaker will cease to exist. Sure thing or not a sure thing?
Sure thing. It's a
Right. Well done, Elliot.
Yeah.
Well done.
Now,
I'm not telling you who I think, because that would be bad to do that.
Yes, no, and we are not going to ask either.
Look at that.
And we do not want to answer that either.
All right, 1 for 2. Let's you're on a hot streak.
It's tough times for companies that aren't profitable. Whilst the investors have decided that's not a good thing right now.
Correct. Yeah, and you're seeing it play out in stock prices all across the board there. But all right,
let's see. Can you close out with another hit?
All right, so so Doug, we mentioned earlier you're a Georgia Tech guy, and and I was doing a little research, and I'm a Heat fan, so I'll put it there. But I believe that Chris Bosh is the greatest Georgia Tech basketball player of all time. Oh. Sure thing or not a sure thing?
Not a sure thing.
Oh, come on, Chris Bosh.
Who do you got, Doug?
Who you got there?
Mark Price.
Mark Price,
the old Cleveland Cavalier.
Very nice.
Yeah,
very.
Nice. I started at Georgia Tech, and I knew you were going to do something, so I brushed up a little bit. I started at Georgia Tech in 1981, and that is when Bobby Crimmins came to Georgia Tech. So I never, and I can say I wasn't a huge basketball fan or follower before that. So I didn't know that Georgia Tech had been horrible for decades. I came there, Bobby Crimmins, he rejuvenated the team. We won the ACC tournament. We were in the top 10, a bunch of years. Great time. Mark Price, John Sally, all those guys, and Bobby Crimmins. And I was in Columbia, South Carolina, working when Bobby Crimmins decided to go to South Carolina, which was his alma mater. And coach. And, of course, I was devastated. Everybody at Georgia Tech was devastated. 2 days later, he changed his mind and decided not to leave Georgia Tech. Wow. And then the city of Columbia turned on him like rabid dog. And the team Tech was never good again after that. It's like, I think it did something to him because he, made that decision and alienated his alma mater. And so it's been a tough 30 years.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting though. It's funny. Some names that I didn't realize came out of Georgia Tech, but Kenny Anderson.
Yeah, the Jet.
Stephon Marbury.
Yeah.
Was a Georgia Tech alum. So really some interesting.
We had some great teams and great players. And Mark Price shooting those 3-pointers. The best sports events I've ever seen were when Mark Price decided that he had to single-handedly win the game, and he started just sinking those 3-pointers.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, there you have it. 1 for 3, I would say.
I was
from a baseball perspective.
Not bad.
Yeah.
We'll keep working on it.
Yeah.
We'll keep working on it. Well, Doug, you have been a fantastic conversation. I think a ton for dealers to take away from this. And again, for dealers that are interested, go to jdpower.com, look at the research that's there, reach out to the team, and you guys are willing to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Doug.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Take care.
Yep.